Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the second session of the fourth Asia Finance Forum, Reinventing Finance for Sustainability and Inclusion. What this session is all about, you will hear from our experienced moderator, but we're definitely talking about crowding in private finance for blue and green innovation. So I have the pleasure to hand over to Ms. Mitzi Borromeo. She's the director and executive producer of Mind School TV, arguably the most updated educational program for free TV in the Philippines, but you might know her as a former broadcaster at CNN Philippines. So she's no stranger to your TV screen. So with these words, I'm going to hand over to Mitzi. You're in good hands and enjoy the conversation. And I heard you have three very interesting guests with you, Mitzi.
Hello, Yost. Indeed. Thank you very much. Nice to see you again. It's been a very interesting day one so far. So good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Yes, we do have a very brilliant panel today. Definitely, I'm excited for this what's sure to be an enriching discussion. It is great to be here with all of you today. Welcome to session 2 on crowding in private finance for blue and green innovation. As I said, we've got a brilliant panel today to help us dig deeper into the crucial role of multilateral development institutions for crowding in the private finance required to scale sustainable finance. Now, in this session, we will discuss products, instruments, and finance facilities offered by multilaterals focusing on crowding in private finance, specifically to finance blue, green, or climate innovation, which was discussed in session 1. So multilateral development banks, or MDBs, can become major agents of change in private sector-led sustainable development. We know there are ambitious goals and targets to meet the SDGs. We know that catalyzing much larger volumes of private finance for SDG-related investments is necessary for achieving the scale needed in developing countries, given very real constraints on fiscal space and on growth in foreign aid. In the session, our experts will take us through various ways in which MDBs can provide support, as well as examples of crowding in. So before I introduce our panels, let's do a quick poll. We just want to see where you are coming from, our different participants. The question that we'd like you to answer, it's a multiple choice question. What environmental challenge in your country or your region needs urgent MDB support? Is it A, ensuring effective greenhouse gas mitigation? Is it B, adapting to climate impacts? And this might include food security, for example. Is it C, environmental health? Is it D, ocean plastics pollution? Or is it E, deforestation and biodiversity loss? So we'll give you some time to answer that poll. We'd love to hear what you think and see where you're all coming from for the different regions in different countries. Now, let me introduce our panel, starting with Jackie Sortani, who is the director of ADB's Infrastructure Finance Division that covers East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands. Mr. Sortani has over 30 years of successful experience in Asian infrastructure lending and advisory, including working as Regional Chief Risk Officer at Siemens Financial Services Asian Commercial Finance. He has a strong credit philosophy and sector and regional knowledge across the entire energy chain, infrastructure, and telecommunications. Welcome, Jackie. And next, we have Mona Sur, who is Practice Manager for Environment, Natural Resources, and Blue Economy in East Asia and the Pacific region at the World Bank. She manages a team which provides financing, technical assistance, and knowledge solutions in areas such as forests and landscapes, circular economy, pollution management, blue economy, and environmental policies and institutions in Vietnam, the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos PDR. And our third panelist is Saurav Kumar, CEO of Euler Motors, an automotive original equipment manufacturer, OEM, focused on electric commercial vehicles. The company is developing and deploying innovative technology solutions to democratize a swift electric vehicle transition, building EVs that are designed for India from India. Euler Motors aims to create superior alternatives to traditional mobility for mass adoption of electric vehicles. All right, so maybe we can see quickly the results of that poll, if we can pull that up quickly. Here we go. So most of our participants. Well, it's actually a tie here. It's a tie between A and B. So what environmental challenge in your country or region needs urgent MDB support? Mostly it's ensuring effective greenhouse gas mitigation and adapting to climate impact. So that's a great way to kick off our first question. So the first question I'd like all of you to answer, what do you think are the most important ways in which MDBs can provide support in blue or green innovation to address challenges such as those we just saw in the poll? So let me ask Jackie first. Can we call on Jackie?
Hi, Mitzi, and thank you for having me, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So the way I'm going to tackle this question is, as you said, Mitzi, I like to give examples. And so I'm going to pick a blue loan that we did a couple of years ago. This was for a recycling facility in Thailand with a company called Indorama. And I think really where MDBs can add value is in several ways. I mean, the whole recycling need in Asia is tremendous. So what can we do? Well, first of all, this is still a relatively new sector for commercial banks. So I think, again, it's incumbent on the DFIs to really lead the way. So that's what we did. Secondly, we ensure with these kind of facilities that our strict environmental and social safeguards policies are adhered to. So really, we make these companies best in class. And thirdly, there's a whole debate about things like greenwashing. Hopefully there's no blue washing, but really ensuring that the companies that we do lend to are really properly certified as blue loans and green loans. So again, ADB in this case went out to an independent expert to ensure that this really adhered to proper blue loan principles and ensure that this was really classified as a blue loan. Last but not least, what we like to do is take examples in one of our countries and try and replicate that in other countries. So again, by doing a blue loan with Indorama, which is a world-class company in Thailand, they are building these recycling facilities in Thailand, in Indonesia, in the Philippines. And so it's the idea is replicating that in many of the Asian countries. So many things that I'm sure we'll touch on more later, but I'll stop there with my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Definitely, that example does open up a lot of questions. Definitely, we'd like to understand these loans better and the incentives, for example, the processes, and exactly how to check. There are lots of ambitious goals to meet, and how do we go about meeting those goals? So let's go to Mona for now. Mona, your thoughts on the question?
Great. Thanks very much, Mitzi, and greetings, everyone. Thanks as well to the organizers for inviting me to be part of this panel. So I think similar to ADB, the World Bank Group has also been working on a large number of thematic bonds as a way to provide a support on blue and green innovation. So let me also share a few examples. Our Sustainable Finance Advisory Services worked with Fiji on its green bond issuance, which actually kickstarted this class of investments in emerging markets. And since then, we've also been able to support several emerging market issuances, including the first green sukuk in Malaysia. The sukuk is an Islamic green bond, and green bonds and green sukuks in Indonesia as well. More recently, we also supported the Republic of Seychelles with a blue bond. So that was the first sovereign blue bond. And it was designed to support sustainable marine and fisheries projects. And then you may have seen even more recently, we have helped launch the first wildlife conservation bond in South Africa. So this bond, seeks to conserve an endangered species, the black African rhino, in 2 protected areas in South Africa. And through this financing for the conservation bond, rhino protection will not only help other species that share the habitat with the rhinos, but also contribute to the economy through tourism, job creation, as well as generating foreign exchange, which is quite important. So these are some of the areas, but there are sort of a range of other ways that we have been supporting blue and green finance. Thanks.
Thank you, Mona. That brings to mind WWF Philippines, which was one of the first NGOs I worked with back in the day when it started in the Philippines. It was through a debt for nature swap. So that we're hearing more of that now. At the time, that was one of the first to happen in the Philippines. So let's hear from Saurav. Saurav, your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the panel. So I can just for a context, right? So Euler is developing and building the light electric commercial vehicles. We're building these electric cargo vehicles, and our main aim is to sort of accelerate the transition of sustainable energy. Here, like, I mean, we are on the other side. I think MDAs like ADB has invested in Euler Motors. So we are on the recipient side, and our goal has been to sort of accelerate. So that's one of the ways I think multilateral development institutions can invest in companies and just like us. The second thing, I mean, because we are coming from the EV ecosystem, a lot of our thoughts and my experience has been around the pollution and how do we get rid of it on the greener side. I think one of the things that we have faced lately, I mean, over the last 4 years, we have been able to build a very good product. And when I say build a very good product beating the ICE engine vehicles in performance, efficiency, in almost every regard, the vehicle is really good. The challenge has been on the how do you get the vehicle financing for these done, and these vehicle financing options has been limited, and that has been limited because the technology is still evolving. There's a technology risk, there is a product risk, there is a risk around how these product will sustain 6 years, 8 years, what would be the value. But this is where I think multilateral MDAs can help a lot. They can, and we'll discuss today maybe in more details how that can happen. But today the interest rates for an electric waste vehicle in commercial is usually 2% or 200 basis point up than the regular sort of the ICE engine vehicle. And those are the things that make these vehicles a bit difficult to be bought by someone who is working at the bottom of the pyramid. So I think those are the areas. Then obviously around the overall scaling, how do we scale some of these projects? I mean, Euler is just one example, and it would take multiple Euler in multiple parts of the world to sort of tackle the air pollution problem. And what we are doing for India, it can be scaled for Vietnam, Philippines, parts of Africa, Europe. So almost, I mean, there would be similar examples where commercial vehicles would be one of the major contributor for air pollution. So I think some of the challenges, whether it's on the vehicle financing or the manufacturing, or the companies coming together and sort of helping financing organization to sort of understand some of these risks, write these risks together on the product and the business side. I think that's something that I'm very excited about working toward to solve this. And I would love to discuss this with Mona and Jackie on this panel.
Thank you, Sora. Very important points. We have seen the growth of more MSEs, MSMEs out there, and these are the very questions they have. As you said, a lot of this technology is new. There's so much uncertainty out there. That's why conversations like this also are so important. We need to share the knowledge. We need to explore. There's a lot more research we have to do. So this sharing really takes us forward. Now, I want to ask now about what MDBs, what multilaterals can do so that we can crowd in more private investment. So I want to start by looking at physical and social infrastructure. If we can go over to you, Mona. What do you think multilaterals should do to focus on physical and social infrastructure, as well as looking, perhaps you can also touch at looking in sensitive areas like coastal zones heavily affected by climate change?
Thanks very much, Mitzi. So, we've are able to provide sort of a range of services that go beyond the financing, but which are really quite important in terms of supporting the overall enabling environment for access to finance. So, the MDBs provide advisory services to governments on developing standards, taxonomies, frameworks, regulations, and other building blocks to be able to actually provide these sustainable financing services. But we can also apply a range of other instruments such as concessionary finance, loan guarantees, policy insurance, pledge funds, and subordinated equity, which also then reduces the risk to the private sector of investing in some of the green technologies, low carbon technologies in nature. And while new tools and blending approaches have been used extensively to mobilize climate finance, many could similarly be applied to green and blue finance, which are not quite there. So I think those are some of the key things that the MDBs can support. Thanks.
Thank you, Mona. I'm sure a lot of you listening are getting a lot of ideas, questions that you want to pursue. So I want to remind you, if you do have questions, please type them into the Q&A chat box and we will get to them a little later. So first, let me go over to Jackie. Jackie, what should multilaterals do to crowd in private investments looking at the financial sector? So this is looking at private sector operations, perhaps, specifically looking at ensuring the competitiveness of ensuring the emergence, expansion, and ultimately competitiveness of sustainably focused investments.
Yeah, thanks, Mitzi. And I think, first of all, Mona's already touched on a lot of really good areas. So to really more to complement what she said, I think again, one of the things that the MDBs do really well is sort of, particularly with some of these new sectors that we're talking about, you really build a level of confidence. Very interesting what Saurav was touching on. The whole space, for example, on electric mobility is really being talked a lot certainly in Europe and the US, but out here in Asia, it's in its infancy. So really, I think what the MDBs can do is really be the leaders of that change, right? So again, I really like to share examples. About a month ago, we financed 26 electric ferries on the Chao Phraya River in Bangkok. So anyone who's been to Bangkok and has been on the Chao Phraya River knows that there are these old boats, very dilapidated, blowing smoke, very unsafe, and it's much nicer to be on an air-conditioned ferry that is battery powered. So that's the kind of things I think we really do very well. It's really to be at the forefront of this development. And again, once if we are able to do this, then that should hopefully set an example for others and to say, look, whether it's commercial banks, other private sector investors, they say, well, look, see, it can be done in Thailand. Why are we not looking at it in India? Why are we not looking at it in the Philippines or wherever? So that's one. The second thing I think is really necessary from the MDBs, and again, I like to give this as a good example, is where there is long-term lenders, much longer than, say, commercial banks are. So again, we did about 4 years ago here in the Philippines, we financed a green bond for AC Energy, which is the energy subsidiary of Ayala Corp. And they raised a 5-year bond and a 10-year bond. And again, our role as a cornerstone investor was very much on the 10-year bond, which is the longer piece of that bond. Why? Because there was sufficient appetite from normal institutional investors in the 5-year piece, but not enough on the 10-year. But then by investing in the 10-year piece, not only did that gain a lot of credibility for AC Energy, so much so that by the end of the year, the same company was able to issue a perpetual bond. So that's how much the markets can move. by showing a good sign of confidence in a fantastic renewable energy company. So those are some of the areas that I think we can do. Last one, I think, again, MDBs really are focusing a lot on, which, again, there's plenty of room for growth, is local currency financing. Again, as I said before we began, I'm an old man, but I have seen both the Asian financial crisis firsthand, as well as the more recent global financial crisis. And if there's one thing that you learn from the Asian financial crisis, is to try very much to raise debt in local currencies. So today we finance people like Saurav. We can finance in Indian rupees, in Chinese renminbi, but more importantly, we look at things like Thai baht, Indonesian rupiah, Philippine pesos, and to really develop local currencies. So those are the kind of things that I think are really critical to catalyze the private sector. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Jackie. All very exciting, those examples you gave. Obviously, that's very near. I'm in Southeast Asia, so it's nice to hear that we're seeing this coming, and hopefully we see more of that from the Philippines. In fact, there was just an agreement recently between the Philippines and ADB for, I think, the biggest agreement in the history of ADB lending. It was 400, what was it? I forget the amount. You have to tell me, I have to say.
4.2 billion. 4.2
billion, you see there. I had to get the figure right. Yeah. So that's a lot of money and a lot of help that the Philippines needs. So you segued perfectly to Saurav, because I wanted to go to him next. I know you touched a little bit earlier, Saurav, on some of the challenges and what can be done to help startups like yourself, like Euler Motors. Can you talk more about what MDBs can do to crowd in private investments for technology and entrepreneurship? And perhaps you can share your own experience with Euler Motors and how the support you got from ADB as well.
Thank you, Mirji. So two things before I sort of drill down onto the specific point. One, I agree with Jackie over here that a lot of the point around the capital MDI investing in greener sort of capital is well understood, I think, and there are a lot of options available when we are looking at some of the developing countries. One of the things that I had seen while we were building, one of the reasons why we built Euler, and last 5 years we have been trying to push the electrification so much here in India, is that if you look at the top 20 cities that are most polluted in the world, you would find most of them to be present in the South, in the Asian sort of community. So it's not an India problem. I think it's in fact, the entire Asia is sort of going through that. So whatever challenges and thoughts that we have here today that we'll talk about from my lens of looking at the India, I think a lot of this could be applied to the all of the economies. The second thing that I wanted to talk was more from an example point of view. Last year, when we launched our first 3-wheeler cargo vehicle. So instead of which is not the most prominent vehicle globally, but instead of 4 wheels, you have 3 wheels in the vehicle, and it's a cargo vehicle. If you look at the ICE counterpart, the diesel and electric, the vehicle financing used to be 9 to 10% on a flat basis. On the electric vehicle, when we started selling, it was 14% on a flat basis. Everything remains the same customer, same time period. But if you just take care of the, ICE versus EV, it went up by like 4 to 5%. But over the last 1.5 years, when we partnered with some of these NBFCs, and we helped them understand the product, the technology, and we allowed them some of the technology through APIs that we shared, where they can track what the asset is doing, how many kilometers that the asset is doing, and we exposed them that. We shared some of their risk. We've been able to get that 14% to 11 to 11.5%. This really helped me understand that, if the financing institution and some of the companies like, for instance, Euler and other EV companies can come together, I think this problem of financing can be solved. It can be made more better. EVs are by definition, they have a lot of data coming, and these data can help assess the risk and help assess the value, and accordingly different stakeholders can participate in sort of lowering that risk. So that was an example that helped me understand that, if MDAs and tech can come together, I think we can solve this problem. And if we can solve this problem for India, we can solve it for a lot of the countries out there. Very specifically, the kind of challenges that we have seen, I mean, coming to the exact question, for companies like Euler, which is a manufacturing company, we have all kinds of capital requirement, right? Whether it's your working capital, short-term, long-term, equity that you need for R&D, vehicle financing. So you have all kinds of these capital. So one is obviously increasing the pool of the capital that is there with ESG mandate. I have seen that have been growing over the last few years, and it has been clearly growing. I think the definition of ESG over there can be made a bit more, I would say, clearer and more impactful, where the companies that are actually doing, let's just say, a lot in terms of shifting the entire transition, they get a bit more of benefit. So that was, I would say, the definition of ESG needs to be bit more careful so that there's capital available. The second thing is on the subvention side. Subvention, so the capital which, let's just say, an NBFC or a commercial bank gets for green financing, if that can come at a layer, let's just say even 1% lower than the regular, if it's what's coming for an ICE, diesel, or anything else, then some of these gap around the risk that is there on the life cycle, that would get lowered, because I think that entire one cycle needs to happen where somebody has to build these at scale. These needs to run at scale. Some of them will fall, some of them will scale really well. The secondary value will get established, and then the cycle will rotate, and you would no longer need that subvention. So that would be my like some of the thoughts on how MDAs and tech startups sort of can come together.
Thank you, Saurav. Yes, indeed, it's a lot. It's a big source of stress, as you said. That journey for an entrepreneur, right? Worrying about all the things you have to find capital for. And I'm sure we'll touch more on that, but let me raise, somebody put in a question here for you. Actually, I also for other panelists, I'll start with you though, Saurav, because it's connected to what you said. This is from Anya Prilia Azaria. Does Euler Motors have any plans to expand electric three-wheeled vehicles or cargo to other Asian countries, like perhaps Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore?
Yes, 100%. So next year we would be coming. So we are giving ourselves this year just to make sure that our servicing is what I was chatting with you, Mirji, in parallel as well. Servicing is very, very important to us because by definition, EVs are transition that is happening across the segments. So we want to make sure that if somebody is buying our vehicle, the experience that they get with the vehicle is at par, if not better than the ICE vehicle. We would love to export this vehicle and more than anything else, like I think the post-sales experience is very, very important to us. So we are trying to get the infrastructure. So if you look about a journey about Euler, we have built the vehicle, but we also build an ecosystem around the vehicle, whether it's the charging ecosystem or the servicing ecosystem that is required to sort of facilitate some of these sales. So we would definitely come by next year. That has been on the plan. So we have given 1 year for ourselves to make sure all the service playbooks and everything is well sort of documented and understood before we start expanding to other countries.
Exciting. I'm glad you said that because after sales service is key. I mean, that there's nothing worse like investing so much money in something and only to be disappointed that you don't have customer service. So good to see that. And as you said, it's also, I guess there's also going to be the challenge of dealing with different cultures once you do expand to other countries. So there is no one size fits all. You will always have to deal with certain, as you said, ecosystems, work with different cultures and different, I guess, set of, frameworks. And which leads me to this question. This is, sorry, did you want to say something, Saurav?
Just adding to a point around regulations as well. So
Yes.
product, basic ecosystem requirements, the constraints of how much people want to use, the distances, the charging, all of that. Yeah.
Exactly. So apart from, I mean, it's complex. There are a lot of things to consider, which is this kind of relates to the question for Mona. This is from Erica Sarmiento. This is also looking at culture, I suppose, culture and how it plays into some of the projects that you have to consider. She asks, in Indonesia, did you apply Sharia finance principles? Curious how or in what ways you merged Sharia law with green finance, for example, green or blue bonds. Mona?
Thanks very much, Mitzi. So yes, it is based on Islamic Sharia financing for the green sukuk in Indonesia. And, basically there is no sort of interest for the bonds. But I wasn't personally involved in the Indonesia case. So I don't know a great deal of details, but we're happy to connect the participant and with colleagues who can provide much more detailed information on that. Thanks.
Very interesting. I assume there's always a lot of groundwork for that. I know that's part of the, a lot of, I mean, I'm working with community, I guess that's a grassroots, right? There's a lot of your colleagues on the ground who work with a lot of these communities. And we will be talking about some of these communities that you empower also later on. No, Mona, we'll get to that. But let me go to Jackie. A question for you, Jackie, again from Anya Trilla Azaria. Anya asks, does the ADB have any plans to fund renewable energy projects such as solar, wind, and hydro in Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia?
Anya, thank you very much for the question. And the simple answer is absolutely yes. And if anything, we'd like to do more. And let me just touch on Indonesia, since it sounds like you're from Indonesia and you're specifically interested in Indonesia. So ADB has done a number of renewable energy projects, first starting off with geothermal. And as Anya, you would appreciate, Indonesia and actually the Philippines are two countries in Southeast Asia that are blessed to sit on what's called the Ring of Fire. And that allows them to benefit from a very natural renewable energy source called geothermal. So the steam under the ground. So we've actually, ADB has financed 3 geothermal projects. The first one, which I was personally involved in, was the Sarula project, which is at 330 megawatts, is one of the largest geothermal projects. But to go further than that, we also have financed a 72 megawatt wind project and 4 small solar projects about 3 years ago. But I would say that that's just the tip of the iceberg. We need to be doing a lot more. We need to be doing a lot more in Indonesia. We have in recent years been very, very active in Vietnam, where we're about to close our 6th renewable energy project. So we need to do more. And Thailand is another very active market for us. But looking at Mitzi here, we need to do a lot more here in the Philippines. So renewable energy is probably one of our core focuses. We need good sponsors, we need bankable deals, and we need, in these countries, obviously, a stable and very reliable legal and regulatory environment to facilitate that. But super excited about doing more renewable energy in Southeast Asia. So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Jackie. Good to hear. There is so much potential, a lot to do. And I want to bring in the topic now of COVID-19, because COVID-19 brought up a lot of issues and really forced us to reset, to review our purpose, mission, project. So before I get to the question, I want to bring up this poll just to get a pulse again for what all of you think. And this is more of it's your thoughts on the question. So you have the option to choose on the slide bar. The statement is, the COVID-19 pandemic has sped up MDB or multilateral action in my country or region towards rebuilding a more resilient future. So you have the option on that bar to choose from a spectrum of strongly disagree to agree. or strongly agree. So let us know if you think that statement is true for the area that you are from your region or country. Again, we'll give you time to respond to that. And while we're waiting, I want to ask our panelists about their thoughts on how the pandemic has impacted the sector. So we all know it's upended our lives. It's dramatically changed the way we work, the way we live. It's transformed the financial systems worldwide toward much greater digitalization, for example. And with that comes a lot of problems. So we're in this crisis, of course, amongst other crises like the climate crisis. We're in a geopolitical crisis with the Russian-Ukraine war, food insecurity, inflation, food prices, and food security are worries also. And as Mark Carney said in his keynote address earlier, he said the disruptions caused by the pandemic on economies and human welfare may reverse decades of hard-won gains in poverty alleviation and development across Asia. But with every crisis, of course, comes opportunity. So I want to focus on the opportunity. So let me start by asking Mona, how has the pandemic highlighted the role of MDBs, or perhaps your work and the urgent need to respond to this crisis, as well as the opportunity to take bolder action and rebuild a more resilient future?
Thanks, Mitzi. Look, I think to an extent, the pandemic has deflected the attention of governments a bit away from long-term sustainability objectives, largely because governments have had to provide an unparalleled injection of resources to rescue national economies. But at the same time, the pandemic has demonstrated how the disturbance of the ecosystems can have very far-reaching consequences. And therefore, multilateral action is really needed if we're going to turn some of these challenges into an opportunity. So I think going forward, and as we sort of emerge from the pandemic, our focus is very much front and center on green recovery and green jobs. How can we work towards a more inclusive, resilient, green and sustainable development pathway? And to bring this opportunity to fruition, one of the things that really comes to the fore is going to be the importance of regional cooperation and coordination. As the pandemic has revealed, this is a transboundary issue. It impacts all countries. And some of these regional actions during and after the crisis can lay the foundations for this longer term cooperation on important issues that we face on sustainability and climate change. And of course, the need for which will become much more acute after the pandemic has receded, and we can focus more, stay focused on new pathways towards recovery. Thanks.
Thank you, Mona. Before I move on to Jackie, I'd like to get to the results of that poll. So if we can just show the answers. Okay, so most of you answered, you're on more of the agree side. So the COVID-19 pandemic has sped up MDB action in most of your countries or region towards rebuilding a more resilient future. So that's good to hear. We have a hopeful future ahead of us, don't we? Jackie, what about you? Your thoughts? What do you think?
Thanks, Mitzi. I think, leaving aside all the sort of the personal challenges, I think probably everybody has faced. From a business perspective, or the role of the MDBs, I think it's been what I'd call a little bit bittersweet. Sweet from the perspective that I think, it has made it very, very clear how important we are, particularly in Asia Pacific. We are supposed to be counter-cyclical, and the pandemic is exactly where a bank like the Asian Development Bank should be counted on. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I like to focus on examples. We did our first aircraft facility for a airline called Fiji Airways, an airline that may not be well known, but it's the leading airline in the Pacific Islands. ADB covers 14 very small Pacific islands. And you take for granted, you think, oh, it's an airline is all about, us all going on holiday, but it's not only that. Airlines are critical for everything from, providing medical emergencies to jobs in the Pacific Islands. A country like Fiji relies 40% on tourism, and so much more. It connects with other Pacific Island countries. So there's so much. It's really the livelihood of that whole economy is its airline. And we provided a liquidity support facility for $65 million. And really, it's there when their normal sources of financing dried up. So I think, and I'm sure Mona has many also similar examples where really entities like the World Bank Group and the Asian Development Bank really provided what we called liquidity support facilities for our clients, both private sector and government. So that's a sweet part of it. I think the bitter part, which I'm really hoping for all of us on this call, we hope to see coming towards the end of this pandemic, but it's this lack of ability to see our clients face to face. I would particular shout out on this conference that we're having today. I hope next year we're doing this face to face, because there's nothing like meeting people face to face. And just to give you an example, I was in Vietnam last week, and to actually go and see a wind power project, which we've been working on for the last 2 years, to see those turbines up and running, to talk to the client about what their challenges are and to solve whatever their challenges are face to face. There is nothing like that, a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams call can replace with. So I'm really looking forward to the days that we're out there in the fields, so to speak, in the trenches again, and speaking to our clients. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Well said. Of course, it does save on carbon emissions and airline costs because we don't have to fly here and there. But you're right, there is nothing like making that connection. And that's why I love that you give these examples, because when we talk about finance and multilateral support, it can be a very cold topic. But when you give these examples, we really put a human face to this and show the people who really need the help and what these financial instruments really do to help improve lives. So I want to go over to Saurav. Saurav, would you share your thoughts on perhaps how the pandemic affected you guys at Euler Motors, how it made you pivot, maybe the challenges and the opportunities presented?
Before answering that, I would like to mention that ADB actually started speaking to them in the midst of first wave of COVID. So I think it was, now that it's a public information, I can talk about it. So I think May 20, roughly around that, we started talking. And it did take them a long period of time. Given that startups have a very short span of time, early days, but by second wave in India, I think by January, February, we were able to close the deal. So ADB had invested in Euler Motors all remotely. I think when the very just before they were wiring the money, I think they had sent a team here just to say, just have a look at physically if it's possible. But they've done everything, like their site visit, factory visit, suppliers view, all on remote. So it was a very different sort of interaction, as Jackie and Mona was mentioning. So pre-investment, right? When the team would come, they would see, and then everything happening on Zoom. It was I think really thankful to the team that they did the investment. So we didn't have to pivot. Coming back to the impacts, right? So I think from day one, when we had started Euler, we have been super focused on electrifying the commercial vehicle. We believe that if you look at the air pollution in any major cities, the almost majority, 40% of that pollution will come from vehicular pollution. And almost, if you look at vehicular pollution, majority of that would come from the commercial vehicle. So from day one, we were very focused that we want to electrify the commercial vehicles, starting with the smaller vehicle and going all the way to the bigger vehicles. If you want to sort of accelerate this transition, there are many companies working on the two-wheelers and the cars, and that was not our focus. Our focus mainly came from an environmental problem. How do we solve for it? COVID sort of accelerated and at the same time also created some of the stumbling blocks in the progress. I'll talk about the progress part first. For the first time, and this is, I think, globally also true, that we saw people very concerned about the environment. They were concerned about the hygiene. They could see clear sky. They could see the impact of pollution. Like there were reports of how some of the natural ecosystem has gone back, and it was more beautiful to look at. So that gave a lot of people sort of a sense of how a post-electrified, let's just say a post-pollution-free world would look like. And obviously, electric vehicle is a very small part of that entire thing. There are multiple things that needs to be done to solve the climate change. So because of that, there were a lot of public sector companies. There were a lot of big e-commerce companies that started talking about electric vehicle usage in their fleet. And they started also talking because they had an increased demand coming from people at home trying to order food. So their number of deliveries had increased, and they were looking at sustainable ways to sort of grow. And that was a very, very good sign for Euler companies like us, where we could, go ahead and sort of deploy for some of these, the increase in the delivery size that was happening. But at the same time, the semiconductor crisis across the globe was happening. Your raw material prices had shot down almost 100% more than if you look at the steel, if you look at aluminum, they would have, or copper, lithium, all of this would have gone somewhere between 50 to 100% more than their previous prices. So EVs by definition were a bit more expensive, then everything became even a bit more expensive. Expense is just one part. The time period, because your factories were closed, each country had their own sort of rules and regulations on how these factories were operating, because everybody had to contain the virus. So overall, there was a huge strain on the manufacturing, on the supply chain, on the logistics. And because of that, even though demand sort of increased, we were not able to supply to that demand. If let's just say manufacturing and some of the supply chain issues weren't there, I think entire world would have gone 6 months forward in terms of the electrification goal. So that was the other observation sort of that I had. Digitization is the third thing that I saw. Almost like Zoom became like Zoom, team meeting, all of that became sort of, I think, the most important tool for any conversation, right? A lot of, I think, not being able to see the plants where you are investing money and seeing them remotely. I mean, you also don't get that kind of convert. So, but there was a positive side to it. Digitization improved. So a lot of the strength around electric vehicles is around technology, and a lot of people also became okay to understand and accept technology in their day-to-day routine. So that was a positive thing that I had seen across, whether it's financing, supply chain, manufacturing, even logistics. Everywhere technology penetration has happened, a way for them to see the data without actually physically being on ground and looking at that. So those were some of the high level sort of impact that we saw from COVID-19.
Thank you, Saurav. Excellent experience. Wow. I mean, thank you for sharing that. It's great to see that, wow, a big milestone for the company happened during COVID. How nice to see these partnerships brewing even in the midst of crisis. So there is good, we see the best of humanity actually shine amidst challenge and crises. And, I was listening to a podcast recently from the WTO summit in Davos, and I thought I'd bring this point in because it ties in very nicely with everything you've said. From political scientist Ian Bremmer, who just put out a book called The Power of Crisis. Well, he was talking about how we are now in a geopolitical crisis. And in his book, there's this excerpt from the book where he says in the coming years, humanity will face viruses deadlier and more infectious than COVID. Intensifying climate change will put tens of millions of refugees in flight and require us to reimagine how we live out our daily lives. Most dangerous of all, new technologies will reshape the geopolitical disorder, disrupting our livelihoods and destabilizing our societies faster than we can grasp and address their implications. It's a scary thought, and we're seeing that happen right now. So I want to ask you, how can we strengthen resilience to shocks and stresses, given what we've experienced, given what could happen, further crises ahead? How can we strengthen resilience to shocks and stresses to preserve prosperity and promote sustainable infrastructure? And this could be capacity building, maybe fostering better support in various aspects of operations in your field, and of course, knowledge sharing. Let me start with Mona.
Thanks, Mitzi. Well, that was a bit of a gloomy outlook.
Sorry about that.
Hopefully we won't get there. But look, I think first of all, investing in knowledge. We need to invest in early warning systems, emergency preparedness and response. But we also need to think about, risk assessments that can help inform what sort of infrastructure or investments do we need to prioritize? Is it, more resilient shelters, schools, infrastructure? And then I think, all of the recent natural disasters, cyclones, floods, reinforces the importance of thinking about sort of land use regulations, robust building codes. These are sort of very nuts and bolts type of things, but they're very, critical when it comes to reducing the impact. And then I think increasingly, as we're talking about sort of green and blue, there's the recognition of the importance of nature-based solutions. And these nature-based solutions, be it in terms of restoring ecosystem services by planting mangroves, which can then protect, coastal areas from the impacts of waves and storm surges, or whether it be within cities, protecting the wetlands so that that can alleviate some of the flooding from heavy rains, or helping maintain and protect watersheds. So all of these, I think, are important. And then, of course, there's the financial protection side of things. There's a lot of emphasis in making sure that countries have, lines of contingent credit that they can access in times of a disaster to be able to provide that immediate liquidity when funding is the most scarce. But also various types of insurance, whether it's indemnity insurance to protect crops, homes, private property, or parametric insurance that's been used quite widely. And then social protection systems become extremely important. And I think you'll be very familiar with this from the Philippines, but social protection and cash transfers to be able to provide that sort of just-in-time support to some of the most vulnerable in the aftermath of a disaster is quite critical. But I think there's also, growing recognition in terms of how important it is to just have very inclusive approaches as well to disaster risk management. At the end of the day, the impacts of disasters don't affect everyone equally, and certain groups, be it women, children, other vulnerable groups, persons with disabilities, minorities, marginalized communities, they are disproportionately affected by shocks. So how do we actually provide approaches that also, cater to all groups in society? Thanks.
Thank you, Mona. Wow, that was very comprehensive. A lot of work ahead of us, and that's why we need a lot of investment there. And I'm glad you mentioned nature-based solutions. I mean, this is a true wealth, right? We are destroying the planet, and that's where a true wealth lies. And this is also our insurance protection against a lot of these calamities. Jackie, over to you. Your thoughts?
I think, thanks, Mitzi. I think Mona really encapsulated a lot of great stuff there, and can't add too much more to that. But I mean, just one thing I would say, and really echoing what Mona said, is really the importance of early engagement. I think, again, I come from a sort of a commercial stroke investment bank sort of background, but working at the ADB, this is really what I pride organizations like this. We really look at the entire ecosystem and the design of our projects, from gender solutions, from you talk about the whole impact on and the earlier question about renewable energy, one of the things that I think has a lot of potential is what are called floating solar projects. So these are solar power plants, literally floating on hydro plants, or a small portion of a hydro reservoir. Now, why does that make sense is, well, it saves a lot of valuable agricultural land. And typically the hydro plant is already connected to a transmission system. So this kind of thinking, when governments plan their drive towards, greater renewable energy, look at things like floating solar, look at competitive bid auctions, look at, again, I want to give you another, Mona touched on gender solutions. We financed a transport project again in Thailand, but we looked at things like car parks for handicapped people, which was not something that was originally thought about. But this is the kind of little things like this that you need to make sure that you get engaged early, so you can incorporate that into the design of these very important infrastructure projects. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie. Well said. And great to see the diversity of, I guess, the categories that ADB addresses in terms of, they address all aspects. When we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, of course, there's so many projects that fall under those. So we have, as I said earlier, ambitious goals that we need to achieve. Let's go over now to Saurav. Saurav, your thoughts on, perhaps from the startup or technopreneur point of view.
So I think this point was well covered. I think Mona had almost all the things that she was saying. I think it made perfect sense to me. I think the point that was most, I think, that I liked, and probably if I can double click on it, would be the point around the early sort of warning system. I think one of the things, if I go to 2020 and I try to understand what had happened, I think it hit us like really, really fast. The uncertainties around the virus was not very well understood. I think now, obviously, having gone through one or two of these cycles, we now understand, what are some of the things that can go wrong, whether it's in the logistics, manufacturing, let's just say medicine, I didn't just mean logistics in terms of the supply chain, but even intra-city, within the city logistics, then your groceries, medical facility, all of that. So we understood for the first time, how something like this virus could impact almost everything that we know, right? Your workplace, efficient, all of that. So I think that realization is now with a larger sort of, I would say, group of people. And while this happened, I think I also saw a lot of communities and a lot of people coming together and trying to solve. So I think before your question, Mirzi, you had a point, which was definitely, I would not want to see multiple of these cycles. One or two cycle is even if I hear or read a news that says the COVID percentages are spiking, it just sets off all those sort of bells in my mind that you have to be prepared for everything. But in terms of different businesses will have different sort of impacts. In India, we had that 3 months moratorium on the EMIs when the impact had hit. But a lot of it was with the government and NBFCs and commercial that was running. But how some of these translates to, let's just say, your manufacturing segments, all the people that are blue collared, people that are working on ground. And for us, it's also the vehicles that we're building is for the lowest sort of, if you look at the value chain, the pyramid, these are the owners of the vehicle are dependent on the earning from these vehicles to put food on the table at the end of the day. So those are the things that worries us even more, because everybody that are attached, almost all of our customer, for them vehicle is a means of livelihood. So different segments obviously gets impacted different way in different ways. I think all of us will have to work together. We have implemented something on EEP that I would like to touch upon in your as the conversation progresses, on some of the things that we did specifically for this community and how we helped as a company in making sure that they sort of grow and withstand some of these challenges.
Thank you, Saurav. Community, definitely a very important aspect to touch on. We'll get back to that. First, I want to bring up some questions that have come. We have a lively audience here, and this is not addressed to anyone in particular, so feel free to raise your hand, whoever among you would like to answer this question. One of the major, there's no name from who this came from, I'm sorry, but the question is, one of the major challenges to developing a credible, sustainable finance market is greenwashing. You talked about this earlier, Jackie. You mentioned greenwashing. What are MDBs doing to help in mitigating this risk? What are the key enablers for credible disclosures? Who would like to take that? Jackie?
Yeah, I mean, I can start, and my colleagues on the panel, please feel free to chime in. But as I suggested, look, for institutions like ourselves, reputational risk is key. So we want to make sure that we're supporting the most credible projects. And how do we do that? As I mentioned, there are external great bodies who are good third-party providers of this certification. The Climate Bond Initiative is one entity that comes to mind that has helped certify a number of the green bonds that we've done for renewable energy projects in Thailand. I think there's a company called Systematics is another one. By all means, it is incumbent on all parties, including our institutions, but also these third parties, to provide the certification. It is not, it's not in anybody's interest to finance projects that are not really genuinely green loans, green bonds, blue loans, sustainable linked loans. So we want to make sure, as much as everybody else, that our money is channeled into the most, impactful and green projects in our developing member countries. So really the onus is upon us, and we need to be very, very rigorous in our due diligence on this. So thank you, whoever asked that question. It's a big priority for all of us.
Thank you, Jackie. Mona, would you like to add to that?
I think Jackie covered it well, but I'll just repeat the importance of disclosure and transparency, which is absolutely critical. Thanks.
I just had a point that I wanted to add, and I think I can be a bit blunt here. So basically, we can't take any company's the vision or the mission statement at face value. Like if I'm saying Euler wants to electrify the commercial vehicle fleet, that should not qualify by definition for ESG. We need to look deeper into, okay, off the road, when the vehicle are produced and they're on the road, okay, it's very clear that there's a carbon emission, and if more EVs are there, it's going to become better. But it's equally important to look, where are we sourcing the materials? How are my manufacturing practices? How are my business code of conduct internally? And this is not just for Euler. Like the way I was talking about when I mentioned what MDAs can do for this segment, and I mentioned that that ESG point around ESG needs to be well understood, and it has to be a bit more, I would say, stringent in terms of how these capitals are allocated. So it has to be a bit more, I think, detailed, and companies that are doing really well from a point of view, like for instance, I think there was a report I read that I think Mona had been working on some of the financing with respect to the plastics and some of these areas, where I think it would be incredibly difficult to figure out overall, let's just say, revenues and everything. But that's a very incredible amount of work that is happening. And I think we need to incentivize those kind of effort and bring those ESG capital and make that available for that, right? So I think instead of just taking some of these on a very, very face value, it has to be, the capital has to be provided for the companies that are really pushing the effort in the ESG side, whether it's off the product, but also how are they making, what about workplace injuries, what are the things that they are doing, but not taking anything on face value, but really going in deep, because it's otherwise it will be the rate of change of this transition will be very slow. You would have the same oil companies that are like, earlier building oils and everything, and today they would be one of the topmost in the ESG list. So this is where I was trying to come very early on in my point around the capital being allocated for ESG, but that definition of ESG has to be well understood. It cannot be washed.
Right. Thank you, Saurav. I've heard about similar challenges, for example, for sustainable fisheries, sustainable forestry products, and the certification. There are challenges, I suppose. In some countries, I know some of these certifications are, I guess they're not very rigorous in terms of the criteria and maybe the checking. And some of them can be bought, but that's why we need more collaboration. I guess more finance as well has to go into coming up with groups. This is what happened with the IPCC for climate change, right? So partnerships to look into these issues. So I want to get into that actually now to talk about the significance of partnerships to meet these ambitious goals, to make sure those checks are in place. What are your thoughts on cooperation, this cooperation collaboration, especially between developed high-income countries and developing low-income countries? What do you think should be done to de-risk investment in finance? And what roles can MDBs play in increasing the flow of investment needed to support transition and growth of blue-green innovation in the countries that you may be working with? Let's start with Mona.
Thanks, Mitzi. Yeah, very important question. Means I think ultimately our vision should be, working towards a financial system that really integrates sustainability considerations into the core of its operations, and including sort of the full cost of what we call the positive and negative externalities that sustainability implies. Without this, it would be difficult to reorientate the flow of resources towards more sort of inclusive and sustainable activities. But I think, just from my own experience, working in this space, partnerships are required across the board, with our government counterparts, be it ministries, central banks, financial regulators, but also the private sector, financial sector participants, and other stakeholders, because it is really important that you need to harness the full potential of the financial system and take advantage of all the public and private sector partnerships to actually be able to meet some of these important goals. Thanks.
Thank you, Mona. Jackie, I'll go over to you, and maybe you can talk as well about, in answering that question, looking as well at industry standards and guidelines. I'm not sure, I know we talked about that earlier, but there's also the need, I guess, for the market, we need guidance, and this comes from the multilaterals as well, the guidance on project eligibility criteria. So do you think that partnerships can also address the need to translate general green, blue economy financing principles into guidelines for green or blue bond issuances, for example, or lending?
Yeah, thanks, Mitzi. I mean, let me try and take the first part. I mean, just the whole, the whole theme of partnerships and this collaboration between developing countries. I think that's quite a neat thing. But I think there's an even greater call for, again, speaking about here in Asia, what we call at ADB, regional cooperation and integration, right? So really taking a knowledge of, I really am a big firm believer that if you do a project in one country, it is incumbent on all of us to showcase that and see if we can bring that into other countries. And we're also seeing some really great examples of integration. So, I mean, one case in point is, for example, we have for the longest time seen a country like Laos, which is relatively a poor country, but rich and able to export its power. First, it used to export its power to Thailand. Now it's looking to export its power to Vietnam. So this is the kind of stuff that we should be encouraging. It's this cross-border activity here in Asia. And there again, many, many more examples, even on the transport side, to bring networks, across borders together, like you do have in Europe. To your point on guidelines, there are these green finance principles. There's many sort of guidebooks written on what qualifies as a green loan. Not so much on blue loans, but again, they are being developed. But again, really, I mean, these are all very important. But really what we need here in Asia is, and I'm really constantly looking for more examples of credible entities who, just have the capacity, governments also who are supporting these entities to do more sort of green finance, blue finance. I think our biggest challenge is not the lack of available capital. That one might think that that's the issue. It's not. It's really, I always say this to as many people as I can, it's a lack of really good projects to be financed. So, I am constantly looking for good projects to finance. So principles and guidelines are great, but for me, there's nothing like practical deals to be done in the region. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Well, an example of that, a good deal was with Euler Motors, right, Saurav?
That's right.
I'll go over to you. Yeah, I mean, it must have, the journey to getting there must have been, it's tough. In fact, I know some companies, I think it's Google, they even put finance for failing, because most startups, I think 8 out of 10 will fail. So can you talk about the challenges for you as an entrepreneur, the biggest challenges that you face when it comes to blue or green innovation?
So our biggest challenge, right? Like, I think while we have to solve everything on the technology side, the business side, like when I say technology side, customer is less concerned about what you are putting in the vehicle. They're more concerned about does the vehicle replace the requirement that let's just say an ICE engine vehicle was able to fulfill, right? So unless that is happening, technology replacement won't happen. So that is well understood. Then business side risk, which is, let's just say if you build large e-commerce, FMCG, utilities, all of these companies, will they use these vehicles in their fleet? So that's on the business side. If you solve for all of that, then your question comes around how do you scale, how do you build? And that's where you would require capitals, whether it's in equity and debt. Over the period of time, I think we have been very fortunate being able to attract the equity capital through some of the investors, from India, but then ADB had also come in, which was one of our first sort of external outside of India coming in, and also sort of a financial investor coming in and investing from an impact side. But when we think about the debt, which is the most important part as we scale, and the scale where we have to set up, let's just say, factories that would produce thousands of these vehicles in a shift, then taking it all the way where you're setting up to infrastructure in multiple cities, whether it's charging stations, your service, and then doing this on a global scale, and then doing it for multiple other products, right? You need all kinds of capital, and that is where what we were hoping, and I think there is an internal dialogue also with ADB, and we are trying to reach out to World Bank and figure out if some of these capitals are available for companies that are actually bankable in a way that there is enough of sort of equity capital that has come in. There are enough sort of validation on ground that is there. How do we get capital for a company like us to scale, where we have still not shown like a sort of a very large scale deployment, and we are in that stage where it's not between, let's just say 0 to 5. It's not also like, let's just say 30 to 100. You're somewhere between 5 to 30 on that scale. If you think about 0 to 100, how do we get access to some of these capital? And these could be given to NBFCs, they could be given to Euler own. Let's just say tomorrow we can also come in and create financial institute where we can also give our part of the risk and share the risk, but bring this capital so that we can sort of accelerate or help accelerate this transition. And I think something like this model will be required everywhere. I mean, there would be some EV companies in different parts, different geographies as well, who would be in a similar stage where they would have done a vehicle, they would have, or they would have set up, let's just say, a smaller power plant on the solar side, or different windmill or different thing they would have done from a sustainable, and they are looking to expand. So there, how do we sort of push them a bit more? I think that's an important part.
Thanks, Saurabh. On capital, there's a question here now related to human capital. This is from Ashari Ali. Does the government ready or provide the human capital for the transition on preparing the workforce for the transition, both in terms of supporting the affected workers in existing fossil industries and building the capacity of the future workforce in low carbon industries? Would anyone like to take that question? Who among you? Maybe this might be connected. I think this, yes, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Saurabh.
So I can talk a bit about how we have seen the manpower change happening again from an EV point of view. So when you think about a diesel and electric and diesel versus electric sort of two commercial point of vehicle, the mechanical components and a lot of that has been the same. So the workforce, whether you have in the manufacturing or servicing, those are the similar workforce that could be trained, upskilled a bit, and that can continue to function. But there's a huge requirement of people with knowledge on electrical, electronics. These are the kind of workforce where we have been working with government, at least in India, to try to help us source or upskill people and bring them, whether it's on manufacturing or servicing or it's in the sales part, to bring that. So that's one ecosystem of basically that we have seen, that where Euler also need to invest a lot in making sure that that workforce is available. And I'm sure this particular workforce related to electrical electronics would be required in almost every sector that that is related to a bit around energy.
Saurabh, sorry, since you talked about the workforce, would you talk a little bit about what you do to help your workforce to even support them further? You have the Euler Entrepreneurship Program to empower your drivers. Could you talk a little about it? Because that definitely is a direction towards inclusivity.
Definitely. So Euler created a program called Euler Entrepreneurship Program. This was, we created it last year, right after COVID, when the entire country was affected, and we wanted to accelerate our mission was to accelerate the electric vehicles on road. EVs, as I was explaining throughout the conversation, so there are newer products, there are risks associated with respect to technology and on the product side. We wanted to make sure that there are enough businesses that are on ground, they're okay to use EV. So what we had done was we have worked with a lot of the logistics companies, e-commerce companies, help them understand what EVs can do in their fleet. Once we have done that, then we started working with financer to help finance the single driver entrepreneurs. These are basically the people who take the vehicle in the morning. They will load with water bottles, gas cylinders, or let's just say e-commerce deliveries. They would deliver throughout the day, earn certain revenues, and their entire family would run on that revenue. So what Euler did over there is we partnered with some of these Euler entrepreneurs. We brought in some of the financing institution where Euler went ahead and underwrote some of the business risks, that if these vehicles do not function, then Euler Motors would be responsible. And we helped some of these financiers. We brought in the e-commerce and FMCG companies, that here is a vehicle, here is a driver who would drive these vehicles, and provide them with a 3-year sort of contract. So we built a 3-way relationship between the customer, financer, and the end customer, which was let's just say an e-commerce company. And they would then, everybody underwrote part of the risk. Euler wrote from a product point of view, e-commerce companies wrote from a sort of the business risk, and the driver would then drive the vehicle. We lowered the rate of financing. In some of these cases, we have been able to get their incomes to at least like 200% more, if not like 2.5x revenue that they were earning, because here is a fixed revenue that they would earn. The EVs are much cheaper to operate, and they are more powerful in terms of performance. So they were able to earn more and also at the same time save more in their operation cost. And in net, we had proved that you can do more than like 2x in their revenue. There are some of the pictures that I think we had sent it to you, Mitzi, that you can,
Yes.
if you want to show. These are some of our sort of the early community of drivers that we have created. And we are working on sort of building these larger community, because at the end of the day, our mission, while we are accelerating and we are the transition, we are building these vehicles, our end goal is to make sure that we, at the very bottom of the pyramid, where are these drivers? They are the guys who we impact their daily lives rather than just building a vehicle, but giving them a better earning, better saving. So this is where a lot of it only happened because of partnership. There's partnership between Euler, financer, and the business. And together we all took certain parts of our risk. So this here is a Manjeet. He used to drive for a hyper-local grocery company called Big Basket. He used to work for us for 2 years prior to he bought the vehicle. So he had also seen the journey of the vehicle over a period of time. He bought this vehicle and now he is the owner of the vehicle. And over a period of time, he wants to buy another vehicle and become a small fleet owner company. So we are also trying to push these people from owning a single vehicle to a sort of building a fleet of company, a fleet of vehicles.
I think we have 2 more pictures. If you can move on to the next. Yes, we have 2 more. It's great to see these faces, because these are the people. Wow, I mean, it's a dream come true for them. There we go. We have other. There's another.
These are all single on driver. They used to drive vehicle from someone else. Now they own a vehicle for themselves. And they are dreaming that they would want to build, like, have a fleet of 2-3 vehicles. So that's the positive impact that we would love to bring, other than like making money and like, you know, building, and all of those are great. But these are the things that really gives us joy at the end of the day, that we are impacting life. And that is why service is very, very important to us. Because for us, the responsibility is very important, that once we have given these vehicles, if the vehicle is down, it impacts their revenue, it impacts their saving, and we want to be very cognizant of the growth and everything that's associated with the vehicle.
Wonderful. Thank you, Saurav. Look at those smiles. I mean, that's the heart of it all. This is why you do what you do, right? And this is why we have to continue working on those investments to fund lives. It's all about lives, these blue and green innovations. So we're still getting a lot of questions. I'm afraid we're running out of time. So let me read some of them, because they're from Ashari. I think most of these are from Ashari Ali. So some of them are connected, and perhaps you can choose which you'd like to speak to. Should national governments create policies and regulations to set the net zero targets rather than asking companies to pledge to reach net zero emissions? And then another related, this is following up on ESG. We were talking about ESG ratings earlier. Sometimes there are trade-offs between ESG components. For example, a company could be environmentally friendly, but controversial in terms of social values. How do you see the future of ESG ratings? So who would, Mona, maybe you'd like to take one of these?
Sure, thanks. Yes, well, countries do actually pledge towards getting to net zero through their nationally determined contributions, and then all of the efforts of private companies and others contribute to that overall sort of national goal.
Thank you very much. Another one here, when looking for projects to finance, would you know who, so somebody's looking for funding, would you know who is looking at financing SMEs with $100,000 to $200,000 investments? An example for textile factory wanting to install energy efficient machines, wastewater treatment, water efficient machines. This is from Rakesh Vazirani. Jackie, would you know, these are small, I mean, these are smaller amounts, but perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, Rakesh, thanks for the question. I mean, I think one of the ways that we, depending on which country you're from, so one of the ways, these are relatively small projects, so very difficult to finance on a direct basis. But one of the things that ADB does is we provide support to local banks in those countries, and our funds are designed specifically to SMEs like the one that Rakesh is describing. So it's easier for us to say, you know, lend to a local based bank, you know, whether it's a BPI here in the Philippines, give them, say, $100 million loan, and then BPI, who knows the SMEs market here in the Philippines very well, would then disperse a fund designed specifically to specific SMEs that is part of that ADB loan. So that's probably a better way, is really to see which banks in your local market have facilities specifically for SMEs. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie. We still have a few questions. I'm afraid we're running out of time, but that was good advice as well. I think that could answer some of these questions. So great, lively audience we have there. Thank you for those questions. You can continue to reach out through the activity area in the events page. So I encourage you to network and ask more questions and talk to each other. This is a great space for that. So we can continue doing that throughout the rest of the day's forum. So I'll ask the last question to our panelists before we close. What do you see as the emerging areas of innovation by multilaterals in crowding private investment? And have you faced any gaps that you believe MDBs should or will fill in this regard? Let's start with Mona.
Thanks very much, Mitzi. So look, I think we talked about some of the new instruments. Green bonds, they're relatively new, but there's lots of different instruments available. And again, I think, working closely with entrepreneurs such as Saurav, we get a better idea of what are the needs of the private sector and how to tailor some of that financing. What's the role of blended financing, which can be another way of mobilizing some of this catalytic capital from public or the philanthropic sources to increase investment in green and blue investments. And I think, there are definitely gaps in this space. There's a lot of need for additional finance. But again, going back to the point with Jackie, means part of closing the gap means I think there's a lot of money out there and investors, but sometimes, identifying the right project, the bankable project that would actually yield these, green, blue and climate benefits. And so I think there's a huge role that the MDBs can make in terms of marrying the two, one, working with private sector, working with governments to have, really strong projects that focus on sustainability, green and blue innovation, and then working with the financial sector in trying to tailor, customize instruments and solutions. So thank you.
Thank you, Mona. Jackie, before I let you answer, I'll just add this as a question because it's related to that. Perhaps you can throw in an answer to this. What structural changes need to be brought to allow different financial sectors to invest in the green future of developing nations? Jackie.
Yeah, thank you, Mitzi. It's been a fantastic, and the time has just whizzed by. But I mean, I think really, I'm very excited. All my career has been here in Asia. I would not want it anywhere else. I think we really have so much more to do Just to give you an example, I think, yes, it's great to have entities like the World Bank and ADB very, very active here. We've got commercial banks, but what we really need a lot more of is what I call institutional capital. So long-term pension funds, why are they not investing more? Why are we not developing, capital markets much more deeper for these infrastructure projects? That's on sort of the financing side. On projects, I really think again, it really requires all of us. I mean, we're talking about governments, private sector players, DFIs, everybody to really develop the market a lot more. And I think that's the big challenge here. It's also starting, I mean, again, for me, what really excites me is, we talked a lot about renewable energy, but there are so many other infrastructure sectors, particularly with digitalization and the like, that one has to look at. I mean, I just throw in two that are beginning to excite me that I never even thought of are things like data centers and telecom towers. Why does telecom companies need to own their telecom towers? They can sell them to private equity players, which is again what's happening here in the Philippines recently. So there's so much potential to develop the infrastructure markets out here in Asia. So much more to talk about next year. Thanks.
Indeed, Jack, the time flew by. I mean, really, there's so much to talk about. We could have a whole course on this. So Rav, let's go over to you. What excites you? Maybe new things to look ahead to for Euler Motors excites you about innovation in the field? And perhaps what can MDBs do to address those needs in order to achieve these exciting areas of innovation, Saurav?
So I would concur with my fellow panelists that I think it's going to be, I mean, there are a lot of folks needs to come together, like government, private sector, banks, MBAs, startups like us, technology partners, evaluations, how do you evaluate all of that, and I think there's a lot being done also. I think I would like to take a point here that the situation, if I go back like 5-6 years back and today, I think there's a difference, and a lot of us are already working on it, and everybody is working on it. So but I think we would have to accelerate the given that the speed, the rate at which we've been growing, and given that this has been the climate change and some of that we can see it over a period of time, I think we need to definitely accelerate, but a lot is going on. From a technology side, I think, and especially talking from EV point of view, I think the only point that I had in my mind was around how do we make capital available, whether it's for I mean, companies like Euler, whether it's for manufacturing or working capital or for vehicle financing, at some, let's just say, at some interest subvention or some way that capital is available so that it can be deployed, because these are assets that are also trackable. It's very, some of the risks that are around the vehicle can be easily taken off. So it's something that can scale very fast, something that I believe is in the right spot from meeting the climate goal. So if there are capital that are available that can be deployed, even in short term, long terms, all of that option, right? Like companies would have all kinds of capital requirement, whether it's for supply chain issues or it's for vehicle financing, which could run for 3 to 5 years. So yeah.
Thank you, Saurav. So a lot of challenges here in Asia and also a lot of opportunities, which is the fastest growing economic region. So there's a lot of promise, a lot of excitement, a lot of hope, and just some of the highlights of today's very interesting, enriching discussion. The importance of regional cooperation. Partnerships are key. There is a lot of emerging new areas for innovation, and we have to continue to look at ways to address the gaps, to create a better environment that can help the clients. So of course, as Saurav pointed out earlier, some of our MSEs out there to look at service, and always put humans. Remember that at the heart of all of these discussions is the human element, right? And the only certainty is change. We will continue to change, to evolve from this crisis, from these changes. And every crisis also presents opportunities. So let's seize them. And we need to embrace these by identifying effective policy responses, not only to support strong, sustained, and inclusive economic recovery, but also to rebuild smartly. So indeed, this is the path to reinventing finance for sustainability and inclusion, the path to rebuild smarter for a better normal, for a brighter future. Thank you again to our panel. Thank you so much, Jackie Sertani, Mona Sur, and Saurav Kumar for your brilliant minds. And to our very lively audience, thank you for being here. Over to you, Yoss. Sorry, we went a bit over time.
I think that's okay. I think this was a very enriching and very lively conversation. Thank you to Mitzi Borromeo for actually moderating so nicely this panel. And again, also to our attendees who we want to ask once more time to go to your app and give us a little bit of feedback. There is in the polls and Q&A section a possibility to provide feedback. We would like to hear from you. In the meantime, I want to also thank you, our three panelists one more time. Mona Sur, Saurav Kumar, Jackie Sertani for sharing so generously with your experience here. And I think this sets the stage very well for tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to meet again at 1 p.m. Manila time. We're going to have some highlights from today shared by Junkyu Lee. And then we are having another keynote for you by Ms. Shamsha Akhtar, the chairperson of Karandas, Pakistan, but many know her, for example, as the former executive secretary of the Economic and Social Commission of the Asia and the Pacific in Bangkok, and many, many other positions she held and she's still holding. And she will deliver a keynote on financing a green and inclusive recovery. Last but not least, right after that, we're going to have session 3, Smart Solutions for Jumpstarting an Inclusive Green Recovery, moderated by Rico Hison. So don't miss it. We want to see you all tomorrow again. Thanks to everybody who spent time with us today. And tomorrow, 1 p.m., Manila time.